We Travel into the Mines by Paranoid Letters. My boyfriend Jake has a gifted ability to travel into other people's minds. It sounded crazy. I took it as a joke at first, but he later proved it to me by inviting me to travel into the minds of people I knew. The first time he took me to travel into another person's mind was into Chelsea's. Chelsea was my best friend. She was always a chatty person, loved to talk, cheerful. But at the same time, there was this peaceful and calming feeling whenever she was around. And that was exactly how the world within her mind looked. It was a sunny summer day with a bright blue sky stretching endlessly. The breeze was soft and soothing, accompanied by the constant chirping of birds. From that moment on, Jake took me to travel into a lot of people's minds. We did it by first, of course, falling asleep. Jake could visit anyone's mind while they were asleep in order to invite them on a journey. However, the person whose mind we were entering didn't have to be asleep when we jumped in. "Would you like to meet my mom today, Tia?" Jake asked one day. Of course, I said yes. Celia, Jake's mother, was a kind and lovely woman. She was bedridden due to her illness. "Are you willing to take another travel into someone's mind today?" Jake asked as we rested in his mom's living room. "That would be lovely. Whose mind are we traveling into today?" "My mom's. Wouldn't you like to know?" Jake smiled. Celia's mind was one of the warmest I had ever traveled into. It was lovely, peaceful, and for some reason it felt wise. But then it changed. The bright, summery landscape that once felt so warm suddenly turned dark, stormy, and windy within seconds. I had traveled into various minds with Jake, and nothing like this had ever happened before. "What happened?" I asked. "There he comes," Jake whispered. "Who?" Before I even realized it, something grabbed me. A giant, dark, shadowy hand emerged from behind me and lifted me into the air. I turned around to see a towering, shadow-like creature grinning at me from ear to ear. "Jake! Help!" I screamed in horror. "My mom," Jake spoke slowly and calmly, "has been suffering from severe depression for years. That creature is what depression looks like. It's been devouring her from the inside." I kept calling Jake's name, screaming for help. I can't let it kill her from the inside, but this thing remains calm for a while after devouring someone. It doesn't care who it takes. So, every now and then, I have to find another woman. I kicked and thrashed while the giant creature tried to devour me, but Jake didn't react. "If it makes you feel any better, Tia," Jake spoke again, "your body won't feel any pain. You'll die in your sleep." Seconds later, I watched as Jake vanished into thin air. A Cure for Antisocial Personality Disorder by Human Gravy. "You're here because you don't fit into society's neat little boxes," a voice boomed over the loudspeaker. "Our task is to rehabilitate what's broken within you, and trust me, we've become incredibly good at it." The lights flickered off, and a projector at the back of the room sprang to life, displaying a carefully curated montage of horrors. A skeletal, starving child clinging to his dead mother, a dog euthanized, too ill to live, a doctor informing a distraught husband that both his wife and child died during childbirth. Cries erupted from my fellow inmates. Several were immediately removed. Others were taken as well, for reasons I couldn't discern. When the film ended, the room was nearly empty. "Looks like all the frauds are gone," the voice announced. "But to be certain, let's see how you feel about this next film." The projector whirred, unleashing the most heinous, depraved material imaginable. Real executions, the aftermath of Kurt Cobain's suicide, KKK lynchings, Nazi propaganda, archival footage of concentration camps, snuff films, self-mutilation, the torture of Guantanamo Bay prisoners. Again, most of the remaining inmates were removed, leaving only 3 of us. "And here we are, at the end of our test, with only the real deal left," the voice declared. "We'll administer the experimental drug via syringe injection. As agreed in the paperwork you signed, you'll receive a reduced sentence in exchange for your compliance. One last chance to withdraw, if you choose." None of us spoke. We received our injections and were escorted to our solitary confinement cells. 2 days later, "We're going to show you those films again," the voice announced. "If the experiment is successful, we'll know immediately. For your safety and the safety of others, you're handcuffed to your seat. Let's begin." A searing pain shot through me as I saw the starving child. The images ignited something I'd never felt before. Their suffering became mine. I felt sorry for them. I felt the devastation of losing a child and a wife. The images embedded themselves in my mind. I felt things. I didn't understand it. It went against everything I'd ever known about myself. The next film began. Raw terror filled me, crushing the cold, controlled part of me. The anguish was real. Their anguish was real. They could feel. Each suffocating victim left me gasping. Each broken bone, cut, or stab forced a cry of agony. An existential nightmare unfolded as the world's suffering became my own personal burden. We could do nothing to ease the pain. We never understood the harm we caused. But now, we do. A Heavenly Scent Means Death by Paranoid Letters. I was gifted with the ability to smell deaths. And it wasn't a terrifying smell like rotten flesh. No, not at all. It was exactly the opposite. The smell of death, in my case, was like heaven. It started when I was in elementary school. One day my grandma was visiting, and at first I didn't notice anything unusual about her. We were in the middle of a conversation when suddenly a scent filled the air. A scent so beautiful that I felt like I was standing in the middle of a garden, surrounded by blooming flowers. Exactly the next day she died of a heart attack. I didn't realize my ability at first. Not until several deaths later did I conclude that I had this gift. Every time I smelled that heavenly scent, the kind that made me feel like I was at the heart of a sunlit garden, I knew death was coming. A heavenly scent meant death. It bothered me at first, but eventually I got used to it. One day I was at the mall with 3 of my friends. We were browsing through the running shoes at a store, and nothing seemed, or smelled, unusual. Then, within seconds, it bloomed. The heavenly scent radiated from every single person in the store all at once. Having had this ability almost my entire life, I could tell the difference between the scent coming from one person, a small group, or an entire room. They were all emitting the heavenly scent, all at the same time. How the hell did that happen? On our way back to the parking lot, we passed by dozens of people. Every single one of them emitted the heavenly scent. I was horrified. Nothing like this had ever happened before. When I got home, I was about to greet my mom when I smelled the heavenly scent radiated from her too. As I got closer to my dad and older brother, the scent filled the air around them too. Why the hell was everyone emitting the same heavenly scent at the same time? That could only mean one thing. They were all going to die at once, most likely from the same cause. But all those people? There were so many of them, spread across different places, at the mall, on the road, at home. Most of them didn't even know each other. What could possibly kill them all at once? I turned to the TV my dad was watching, and an emergency news broadcast was on. An asteroid had just fallen past the Earth's atmosphere, heading directly toward the town we lived in. The news anchor said it was expected to hit the town in no more than 2 hours, and everyone was urged to evacuate. Not everyone could evacuate in 2 hours. Then I realized I had forgotten something. I lifted my hands, bringing them close to my nostrils, and I sniffed myself. I too smelled like a garden full of blooming flowers. The Day the Earth Shattered by Ezekiel H. Graves. The sky turned red at 9:42 a.m. I was on Fifth Avenue, coffee in hand, when the first ripple of sound reached us. It wasn't a boom or a crash. It was a low, gut-deep vibration that made the air feel too thick to breathe. People stopped, looking around like confused animals before a storm. Then the ground trembled. Windows rattled. The coffee shop behind me spilled customers into the street. Nobody knew what had happened. Phones buzzed with emergency alerts, but they were vague. Global impact event. Seek immediate shelter. Some people ran. Some stood frozen, staring up at the sky like answers might be written there. But there was nothing. Just that red haze deepening across the clouds, turning the sun into a dull, bloody smudge. A woman next to me clutched my arm. Is it war?" she asked, her voice trembling. I had no answer. Minutes later, the first shockwave hit. I didn't hear it so much as feel it, like the earth itself had been struck with a hammer. Every car alarm in the city screamed at once. Glass exploded from windows in a shimmering rain. People fell to their knees, clutching their ears. My coffee slipped from my hand as I stumbled back against a taxi. Somewhere, a building groaned like a living thing, steel and concrete protesting the strain. I didn't know it then, but halfway across the world, an asteroid the size of Alaska had plunged into the heart of the Indian Ocean. The impact released energy, equivalent to tens of billions of nuclear bombs, vaporizing millions of gallons of water and punching a hole through the Earth's crust. A column of steam, molten rock, and debris shot into the sky, breaching the stratosphere and darkening the sun within minutes. The shockwave traveled through the Earth's mantle, triggering earthquakes that shattered cities from Mumbai to Perth. Entire islands vanished beneath walls of water as tsunamis surged outward, racing faster than jet planes. Indonesia, Sri Lanka, the Maldives, gone within hours. The waves hit the coasts of Africa and Australia next, flooding entire nations before barreling across the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. In New York, thousands of miles from ground zero, we felt the earth shudder beneath our feet. The Hudson River surged beyond its banks, flooding lower Manhattan with icy water and dragging cars and debris through the streets. Bridges groaned under the strain, and the Statue of Liberty vanished behind walls of mist and rain. The moment the first shockwave passed, the streets of New York became chaos. People screamed and ran in every direction. Cars collided as drivers panicked, and glass from shattered windows crunched beneath my shoes as I stumbled forward. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't think, I just moved. Adrenaline carried me through the crowd as if my body had decided to survive before my mind could catch up. Sirens blared from every direction, but their wails blended into the background noise of panic. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, another emergency alert flashing across the screen. Shelter in place. Avoid exposure. Take cover immediately. I remember turning onto a side street to avoid the mass of people flooding Fifth Avenue. The pavement beneath my feet trembled with aftershocks, and somewhere in the distance a building collapsed with a sound like thunder. Dust and smoke hung in the air, making it hard to breathe. When I finally reached my apartment building 7 blocks away, it was as if my legs gave out all at once. My breath came in ragged gasps as I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking too hard to grip them properly. Behind me, the distant roar of the Hudson River swelling over its banks echoed through the air. I shoved the door open and staggered inside, slamming it shut behind me as if that thin piece of wood could keep the world out. The stairwell was dark, the power had already gone out, and I had to climb 6 flights of stairs by the faint glow of my phone's flashlight. Every step echoed like a countdown, each breath fogging the air as the building's temperature dropped. When I finally reached my apartment and locked the door behind me, I stood in the silence and let the weight of everything hit me all at once. My pulse pounded in my ears and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Outside the window, the city burned beneath a sky that no longer belonged to us. And that's when I realized the world, as we knew it, had ended, but I was still here. Then rain came as I watched from my window, thick and black, carrying ash and pulverized rock from halfway across the world. By nightfall, the fires had begun. Molten debris, hurled into space by the impact, rained down across the globe like falling stars. Forests ignited from Siberia to the Amazon. Cities burned as flaming stones crashed through rooftops and shattered glass towers. Smoke and ash choked the skies, blotting out the moon and turning night into a suffocating, endless twilight. The days that followed were a blur of fear and desperation. The air grew colder as the sun disappeared behind a veil of dust and soot. Crops withered in the fields, and animals starved, or suffocated as the world entered a nuclear winter. Cities fell silent as their people fled or died. Governments collapsed. Communications failed. By the 3rd week, New York had become a city of shadows. The streets were filled with abandoned cars and the distant echoes of footsteps that never seemed to come close. Fires burned unchecked, their smoke mixing with the ever-present ash that fell from the sky. Somewhere in the distance, the Hudson River continued to rise, fed by storms that never seemed to end. The air smelled of salt and decay, and each breath burned my throat. I rationed what food I had, conserving cans of soup and crackers like they were gold. Water was harder to come by. The taps had stopped running within days, and the bottled supply in my apartment wouldn't last forever. I collected rainwater when I could, filtering it through makeshift cloth screens to catch the ash and grit that fell from the sky. Nights were the worst. Without power, the world outside my window became a void of blackness, broken only by the distant flicker of fires still smoldering in the city's ruins. The silence was so deep it felt alive, broken only by the occasional distant crack of collapsing buildings or the howling wind that carried the distant echoes of sirens and screams. I slept in fits and starts, huddled beneath blankets and coats as the temperature inside the apartment plummeted. The cold seeped into my bones, and I woke each morning with frost clinging to the glass and the ache of hunger gnawing at my stomach. Still, I held on. It's been a year now. New York is a city of ghosts. Most of its people are gone, lost to hunger, sickness, or the long, silent sleep that comes when the cold becomes too much to bear. Those of us who remain live like shadows, scavenging through the frozen ruins, our breath fogging the air as we huddle against the endless night. The fires have long since burned out, leaving only blackened shells of buildings and streets choked with ash and debris. Snow falls year-round now, gray and heavy, carrying the taste of smoke and iron. The air is thin, and each breath feels like pulling ice into my lungs. I've stopped keeping track of the days. The sun still rises somewhere beyond the clouds, but its light is weak and distant, casting only a faint, dim glow that barely touches the earth. Sometimes when the clouds break, I look up at the sky and wonder if anyone else is still out there, or if we're all just waiting for the last ember of humanity to flicker out. I don't know how this ends, but when it does, I hope the earth remembers us not for how we died, but for how long we tried to hold on.